welcome you guys once again to Joen Academy. Previously on neuroanatomy, we discussed the external features of the pons. In this video, we'll be taking a close look at the internal features of the pons. Don't forget that the pons is a part of the brainstem that connects the midbrain with the medulla oblongata. But before we get into the topic of today's discussion, I would like us to note that we'll be discussing the internal features of the pons in two levels. So imagine that the pons is sectioned transversely at two levels externally. Firstly, at the level of the facial colliculus, that is the lower part, and the level of trigeminal nucleus, which is the upper part. Another thing I would like us to know is that when we look at the internal structures of the pons, it is divided into ventral and posterior, or you can call it the tegmental part, by the trapezoid body. The trapezoid body is actually a part of the auditory pathway where some of the axons coming from the cochlear nucleus desiccate. That is, the axon crosses over to the other side before traveling to the superior olivary nucleus. As for the ventral part, it is continuous inferiorly with the pyramid of the medulla. It contains the pontine nucleus, which plays an important role in movement coordination. The fibers from the pontine nucleus cross the midline and form the middle cerebellar peduncles on their way to the cerebellum. The internal structures of the ventral part of the pons has the same structures throughout its length, although the internal structures of the tegmental part is different in the upper and lower parts of the pons. This tegmental part of the pons, which we can also call the dorsal part, is actually a direct upward continuation of the medulla oblongata, excluding the pyramids. Now let's have a proper look at the lower part of the pons, which is at the level of the facial colliculus. At this lower part, the sixth cranial nerve nucleus, which is the abducent nerve, lies under the facial colliculus, while the nucleus of the seventh cranial nerve, which is the facial nerve, lies in the reticular formation. Let's talk about the fibers of the facial nerves a little bit. Actually, the fibers of the facial nerve follow a course that is very peculiar. These facial nerve fibers, first of all, pass backwards and also they travel medially to the medial side of the abducent nucleus, and they form a loop at the dorsal part of the abducent nucleus. As for the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, it lies laterally. Earlier before now, we said that the trapezoid body is a transverse band of fibers that lies behind the ventral part of the pons. It consists of fibers that arise in the cochlear nuclei of both sides. For the medial lemniscus, it forms a transverse band on the either side of the midline. It is just behind the trapezoid body. The lateral spinothalamic tract lies lateral to the medial lemniscus. Then the inferior cerebellar peduncle lies lateral to the floor of the fourth ventricle. The vestibular nuclei lie in relation to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. The dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei are situated dorsal and ventral to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Another important thing we should note about the ventral part of the pons is that it has a transverse and also a vertical fibers. Collection of different cell bodies which comprise of pontine nuclei are actually placed in between the fibers. For the transverse fibers, they are actually the pontocerebellar fibers which come out from the pontine nuclei. They run across the bundle and finally enters the cerebellum through the middle cerebellar peduncle. The longitudinal fibers of the ventral part of the pons are two. The first one is the corticopontine fiber, which comes out from the cerebral cortex and then ends in the pontine nuclei. From the names of these fibers, we can deduce where they are coming from and where they are ending. The second fiber is the corticospinal tract, which is a pyramidal tract. This corticospinal tract is coming out from the cerebral cortex. They pass through the ventral part of the pons to the point where they finally desiccate. Let's look at the upper part of the pons. Inferiolateral to the fourth ventricle, we will see the motor and sensory nuclei of the tegmental nerve. The motor nucleus is medial to the superior sensory nuclei. At the back part of the ventral part of the pons, we will see the transverse band of fibers, which is made up of the medial, the trigeminal, the spinal, and the lateral lemniscus, which can be denoted with MTSL. That is from the medial side to the lateral side. The lateral lemniscus form part of the auditory pathway. It is formed by the fibers arising in the nuclei lying in close relation to the trapezoid body. That is the olivary nucleus and the nucleus of trapezoid body. The superior cerebellar peduncle lies dorsolateral to the fourth ventricle, replacing the inferior peduncle seen in the lower part of the pons. The medial longitudinal bundle is made up of fibers that interconnect the nucleus of the cranial nerve 3, 4, 6, and 8, and also the spinal part of the accessory nerve. I believe by now we must have known the 12 cranial nerves. You can check out the short videos on the 12 cranial nerves, alright? The medial longitudinal nucleus coordinates the movement of the head and neck in response to the stimulation of the cranial nerve 8, although the majority of the fibers of the medial longitudinal nucleus comes from the vestibular nucleus. Alright guys, that is it on the Pons. In the next video on neuroanatomy, we'll be looking at the midbrain. Don't forget that you can support Joen Academy for more interesting videos like this. Click on the subscription button to subscribe. Like, share and leave a comment on the comment section. See you next time. Until then, remain blessed.